This woman just had the most insane morning of her life. She was walking her dog when she suddenly spotted a strange door on the side of an old bridge. She had never noticed it before, but when she opened it and found this covered object inside, her life was already changed forever. And it got even crazier when her lawyer told her this. The fact that Wendy stumbled upon this very bridge on this particular day was not a complete accident. She was forced out of bed early by an unexpected natural phenomenon. A mild earthquake shook her house and awoke Wendy from her slumber, making it impossible for her to sleep. So, after her body filled with adrenaline, she did the next best thing. Wendy stood in the doorway because this was the safest place during a quake. It wasn't the largest tremor she had witnessed since the area often suffered from earthquakes, but it was enough for Wendy to fully wake up. So, with her clothes already on, Wendy decided to make herself useful. She grabbed a leash and chose to walk her dog, a decision with massive consequences. Wendy lived close to the edge of town, where there were plenty of quiet walking trails. But for her dog walk, she always used the same one. It was still dark outside, and nobody shared the street with her. So Wendy simply put one foot in front of the other and enjoyed the silence. That was until they passed a bridge about 10 minutes into their walk. Wendy didn't notice the weird thing about this structure at first, but Bruno most definitely did. Her normally calm, furry friend started barking uncontrollably out of nowhere. It surprised Wendy a bit, but his odd behavior wouldn't stop there. The canine suddenly pulled on his leash with brute force, dragging its owner toward the concrete bridge beside them. "What is going on, Bruno?" Normally, Wendy would not allow any form of pulling. She was a loving dog owner. But given this sudden spike in odd behavior, it sparked her curiosity. She wanted to know why Bruno was acting this way, so she let him to pull her toward whatever caused his heightened tension level. It wouldn't take her long to realize why he acted this way, though. Bruno pulled for about 50 feet before he and his owner, Wendy, stood next to the bridge that would eventually change Wendy's life. Bruno stopped barking at that point but fixated his gaze on the concrete side wall of the structure. "What is it, Bruno?" "It's just a bridge," Wendy said, confused. But then Wendy looked closer and suddenly realized that something was off. She had never seen the side of this bridge before. She and Bruno had walked this trail hundreds of times, and every time, the side of the bridge was covered by a sandy and rocky hill covered in grass. But looking at the structure now, it was all gone. There was just a slick gray wall beside her, and something about it felt weird. Wendy inspected the surroundings. Large pieces of rock and clumps of crumbled down sandy hills lay everywhere. Even some pieces of the actual bridge structure had broken off. This must have been because of the earthquake. It simply smashed the sandy hill to bits, Wendy said out loud. But that was just the beginning of this bizarre journey. It was about to get a lot crazier. Before Wendy knew it, Bruno had started pulling her toward the wall again. He did so until Wendy almost bumped her nose against the cold concrete. He was trying to show something to his owner, but Wendy couldn't figure out what it was. That was until she used her hand to push away from the wall and felt her fingers slip into a narrow crack. At first, Wendy thought it was a crack formed by the earthquake. But when she followed the seam upwards, she saw that it was perfectly straight. It followed a specific route across the side of the bridge, making a door-like shape in the structure. "This is man-made," Wendy said, surprised. And when she looked down and saw a rusty handle in the center, it proved it. What the hell is a door doing here? The outline was huge, filling up almost the entire side of the bridge's wall. And with this newfound discovery, the curiosity of Wendy was undoubtedly piqued. She placed her fingers on each side of the seam and tried her best to see what was behind this mysterious doorway. But the result, unfortunately, was not what she hoped for. It was dark behind the door, too dark to see anything inside. So, after looking over her shoulder several times, Wendy boldly opened it. She placed both hands around the rusty handle and started pulling. While she did so, she also noticed that the entire door was actually made out of metal and was painted to camouflage it with the wall around it. Somebody made a great effort to keep this door, and what was behind it? A secret. That much was clear. This realization sparked Wendy's curiosity even more, and she used all of her might to move into the large metal blockade. Loud squeaks were heard, and Bruno started up his barking again. But her effort paid off because the door started to move upward slowly. After one final grunt, Wendy managed to push the garage-like door open completely. It made a loud metallic noise as it moved upward, eventually rolling back and revealing what was behind it. Wendy stared into a large open space, at least 20 feet deep. It was dusty, and debris, which had probably come loose during the earthquake, was still falling into the space. But there was something else inside this hollow space-an object that would have a major impact on Wendy's future from this day forward. But before Wendy could even entertain herself by looking further, she had to pinch her nose, because the musky smell inside this room was intense. Even Bruno, who was waiting outside, squealed because of it. With one hand on her nose, Wendy looked around, and then she noticed it. In the center of the open garage space was a large object covered by multiple plastic and canvas sheets. She didn't notice it at first because large pieces of rubble covered most of the object. "The quake did a number on this place," Wendy said as she moved deeper into the room and closer to the mysterious object. Wendy placed her hands on the giant thing, trying to lift one of the plastic tarps that covered it. But that was easier said than done. Even though some corners could be lifted an inch or two, there was always another layer underneath them. The rubble that had fallen on top made it impossible to investigate further. And Wendy alone didn't have the strength to lift those heavy boulders. But she knew someone who did. The curious woman walked outside again, but this time with a plan. She needed a second set of hands, and she had a very specific set in mind. She also wanted another witness on the scene beside her, because she felt that by uncovering this object, she was doing something wrong. "Sharing the burden," she said while dialing the number. The phone rang, and on the other side of the line, a male voice answered the call. Wendy had called a contractor who conveniently lived pretty close by. He had helped her with the remodeling of her house, and Wendy knew that he owned heavy lifting power tools, the perfect machinery to help them with this job. And there was a reason why she knew this man would instantly help her. Before Wendy could say her first words, he had already started talking. "Hey, sis, you know it's early, right?" The contractor happened to be Wendy's older brother. He was the handyman of the family, and with his skills and machinery, this job would be a piece of cake. Wendy explained the situation, and her brother Luke agreed to lend a hand. "Be there in a jiffy," he said. About 20 minutes later, Wendy saw two large headlights pierce the still dark morning air. They were accompanied by a loud engine sound, which made the younger sister smile. Her brother Luke brought the big guns since he drove up in a small digging crane, and with it, he got straight to work. The large mechanical shovel first took care of the runway before the bridge. Within minutes, all the loose sand and rubble before the opening were swept to the side, creating a clear runway for the object to move through. After that, smaller equipment was used to remove debris on top of the object before attaching cables and pulling it out of its hiding place. They managed to do all of that within the hour. And by that time, it was light outside. The mysterious object, still covered in its plastic tarps, was out in the open, and it was up to Wendy to get a first peek at what was underneath all of those sheets. Wendy felt excitement shoot through her body like she was on the end of a treasure hunt. She walked up to the large object. With her right hand, Wendy slowly lifted a corner of the top sheet, just like she had done before. But yet again, something stopped her from getting a good look. A black sedan suddenly rolled up on the scene, and a young, neatly-looking man stepped out. "Wendy Gordon?" he said, instantly capturing Wendy's attention. "Yes, that's me. How did you know?" The young man explained that he was the assistant of her lawyer, and he had been assigned by the man himself to pick her up. Wendy was confused. Why would her lawyer, whom she had not seen in 2 years, suddenly want to contact her now, and how did his assistant know where to find her? Everything about it was confusing, but Wendy also figured that it could not be coincidental. Without looking further underneath the tarp, Wendy agreed to come with him as long as her dog Bruno could come too. The assistant nodded and opened the back door of his car. Wendy looked out the back window as the car drove up. She saw the digging site, where her brother remained, disappear from view. "This must be at least just as bizarre for him as it is for me," Wendy thought to herself as the car turned the corner toward the highway. "Let's hope we'll get answers soon," Wendy said, while kissing Bruno between his eyes. After about a half-hour drive, the car arrived at the building owned by her lawyer's office. She recognized it because she went to this place multiple times during her divorce 2 years ago. Her lawyer did a great job handling the paperwork back then and helping her end her marriage in a very respectful way. But what he wanted with her now, she had no clue. The lawyer's assistant got out first so he could open the door for Wendy and Bruno. The confused dog owner looked up at the building before being guided inside the lobby. "Why am I here?" Wendy asked just that one time. But she did not get an answer from the young man in a suit. Instead, he opened the doors to her lawyer's office before disappearing from view. Wendy was greeted by the more informal-looking lawyer she already knew. He guided her in with a smile and asked her to sit down before him. According to him, he had something important to share with her, and he thought it would be best if she sat down before hearing this news. Without dragging out the situation, he pulled a large yellow envelope from his desk. "Hi, Wendy. You're probably wondering why I sent my assistant over to your little digging site just to bring you here." Wendy nodded, even though a second question was also floating around in her mind. Luckily for her, the lawyer also touched on that subject from the start. But before we delve into that, let me explain why I knew exactly where to find you. When the lawyer spoke those words, Wendy felt a light shiver run down her spine. This was indeed the second missing part of the puzzle that plagued her mind. This entire day was a roller coaster, and it was clear that this man knew a lot more than his calm demeanor let on. Wendy nodded and said she wondered how he knew where to find her. The friendly, smiling lawyer answered, "This morning, I received an urgent call from a certain contractor, your brother. He told me about the discovery you made. And he also assured me that before we could reveal to you what is underneath those tarps, we need to take care of a few legal things." Wendy listened to the man but did not fully understand. "Do you and my brother already know what is underneath those sheets? How is this possible, and why has my brother never told me about it?" Wendy's mind was filled with questions, but they were all about to get answered. The lawyer placed his hand on the envelope and stated inside it were documents explaining everything she needed to know. The older man opened the envelope with a pen on his desk and pulled out a handwritten letter. After that, a few vague black and white photos followed. They were blurry and facing the lawyer, so Wendy could not make out what was on them. But the letter would turn out to be the important part here. The smile disappeared from the lawyer's face as he scraped his throat. The man explained that the letter was written years prior by Wendy and Luke's father, a man who died well over 10 years ago. Wendy's eyes turned large instantly because her father was not just any man. He was a man of influence and a man who had done many great things in this town. How could he be involved in this? Well, Wendy was about to find out. Wendy and Luke's father, Bill, was a contractor, just like his son, who followed in his footsteps. While working this job, Bill was responsible for constructing major projects in the area. Town hall and even large aqueducts, which were staples of this town, would have never been there if it wasn't for him. According to Wendy's lawyer, that was also the case with the bridge she was at today. After he unfortunately passed away at the age of 79, he mustered a small fortune with all these projects. He was wealthy, even though his lifestyle never showed any signs of that. The old man was always humble, but left a reasonable amount behind for his son and daughter. "But Wendy, what if I told you that a large part of that money went missing?" the lawyer stated. Wendy and Luke both got $50 from their father's bank account, the entire amount before the account hit zero. However, Luke and their family lawyer always thought this number was incorrect, given that Bill was notoriously distrustful of the banking system in the country. They both knew that there was an extra source of wealth somewhere else, but nobody knew where. And this document, written by your father himself, confirms that thought. Your father was old school. And in this letter, he explained that he kept most of his money in cash. The lawyer started reading a part of the letter. "I, Bill Gordon, hereby declare that my entire inheritance will go to my 2 children. I kept some in the bank, but the rest is kept safe within my projects." For years, Bill and their family tried to understand what that meant. They first thought it was just invested in stones, aka new projects. But after a while, they concluded that their father meant it literally. The cash was hidden inside one of his projects. There was only one problem. Bill had thousands of projects all over the area, and the money could be in any one of them. "But that puzzle was solved today by you," Wendy's lawyer said. He turned the pictures toward the confused woman and invited her to look. "Do you recognize the images on there?" Wendy leaned in, inspected the photos, and instantly was in shock. She recognized them all right. That was the hollow room underneath the bridge. She instantly noticed the object with its covered sheets. Wendy's family lawyer said he and Bill were sorry for not telling her about the inheritance search sooner, but they did not want to rile up a tone of commotion without having anything to show for it. Their father died before ever telling anyone about the exact location of this hideout. But with Wendy's discovery today, the secret was finally out in the open. It was indeed literally underneath one of his projects like your brother predicted, the lawyer said enthusiastically. According to the lawyer, Luke was uncovering the sheets and searching the digging spot right at this very moment. The old man grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and stated that Wendy needed to legally accept 50% of this newfound inheritance. Otherwise, the amount could not be divided between the two kids. Wendy saw that her brother had already signed. "That sneaky man, he knew all along," Wendy said, smiling slightly before placing her name on the dotted line. After placing the signature, Wendy and the lawyer stepped out of the building to head back to the bridge area, but they were not taking the sedan. They were going to need a big vehicle because Wendy described the object as far surpassing the size of his sedan. "We can't transport all of it in that little car." So they took the company van and drove back to Luke. Once they got there, they saw an emotional Luke standing next to the still half-covered object. Wendy got close so she could comfort her crying brother. She hugged him and then turned her neck so she could see for herself what was beneath the tarp. And when she did, tears instantly filled her eyes as well. On the largest pallet Wendy had ever seen lay their inheritance. Wendy saw stacks upon stacks of $100 bills, all neatly organized, forming a solid block of at least 9 long. It was the most money she had ever seen in her life. Once all of it was loaded in the van, it was transported to the bank. Their employees spent all day counting. And when the sun set again, the number was well over $8 million. Wendy was in shock because half of it was now legally hers. Her life changed instantly, all due to an unexpected find initiated by an earthquake. This all sounded like it was made up for a movie script, as if it wasn't real. But after some time passed, Wendy was convinced. That earthquake wasn't an accident. That was her father sending a message from heaven